Hello everyone, my name is Harshmeet Singh and I welcome you all to my YouTube channel. This is a place where I intend to help the civil services aspirants like yourself, specifically in PSIR, that is Political Science and International Relations. Also, we'll be discussing a few bits and pieces about how to write great answers in the mains examinations. That will be helpful for not just the PSIR optional students, but students of all different backgrounds having different optional subjects. In a few of the videos, I will also be trying to discuss how to write great essays and how to make sure that your essay writing skills improve. We'll also be discussing certain important current affairs from time to time. In this lecture, I thought about discussing one of the most repetitive and important topics as in the PSIR optional. If you look at the syllabus of PSIR, that is Political Science and International Relations, in paper 1 part A, we have a topic called Political Ideologies. In Political Ideologies, you are supposed to study topics such as Liberalism, Marxism, Socialism, Feminism, Gandhianism, so on and so forth. Each and every year, you will see at least one, if not more, questions from these topics in the PSIR optional paper. So I thought, why not start this series with discussing this topic from Political Ideologies. In this lecture, I will be discussing about the political ideology of liberalism. My objective is simple. By the end of this class, you should be able to understand each and everything about liberalism as a political ideology, its origin, its present form, the controversies regarding it, its comparison with the other ideologies, its view, different thinkers, so on and so forth. At the end of it, I will also be giving you examples of the questions that have been asked by the UPSC from this particular topic in previous years. And the best news is, if you want to write an answer to any of those questions and you want me to evaluate your answers, I will be happy to do that as well. So if you stick till the end of this class, I will be giving you practice questions. I will also be giving you my email ID where you can send your answers, and I will be giving you feedback on your answers. Now with that out of the way, let's start with our first topic, that is liberalism. Now I'm very sure, doesn't matter if you are from a PSIR background or not, all of you at least sometime or the other have heard about the word liberalism. Liberalism is a word that comes from liberty. This is an idea that believes in man being a rational animal. This believes in the idea that a common man, if set free, can take his or her own decisions. See, there are multiple schools of thought about our history. There are some people or some thinkers who believe that a common man is not intelligent or capable enough to take his or her own decisions. They thought that the government, the king, the queen, all of them must impose their decisions on the common man. They thought that the common man does not know how to live, the common man does not know how to vote, the common man does not know what to do with his or her life. This is where a second school of thought emerged called liberalism. The basic idea of liberalism is, if you give enough liberty to an individual, allow the individual to think on his or her own behalf, take their own decisions politically or economically, they will turn out to be good decisions, not just for himself but for the entire society. The idea comes from liberty, that if the person is set free, if the person is given adequate amount of liberty, the person will turn out to be good. There will always be certain exceptions here and there. There might be a requirement of the government stepping in certain cases, but liberalism essentially believes in the good nature of the human being, in the human being being intelligent and capable enough to take their own decisions going ahead. Now, how did liberalism emerge? The interesting part is, it is not a very old ideology. Liberalism, in fact, emerged in late 17th century. Now, to understand late 17th century, the rise of liberalism, Try and understand what was happening in the society at that point of time in Europe. This is where you have to understand another concept called feudalism. What exactly is feudalism and what is a feudal society? Let's try and understand this with the help of this simple pyramid. In medieval Europe, the society was divided into different spheres. At the very top was the king, the ruler. The king who owned the entire country, the king who ruled over the entire land. The king needed an army so that whenever he or she is attacked or whenever he wants to attack someone else, he needs soldiers with him. So in order to ensure a constant supply of soldiers, the king used to take help of lords. Now, who are these lords and nobles? Lords and nobles were those people who ensured the king that whenever you require, I will bring in the people to fight for you. Remember when we used to be in college and you used to have a fight with someone? The people used to say, oh, wait, I will call my friend, he will bring 100 people. And he would call them, bro, can you please send 100 people in a jeep? I'm in a fight. In that example, you are the king asking for soldiers to fight a war. So you are calling your nobles, you are calling the people who you trust. The king in this case had lords and nobles who would help the king whenever the king required supply of soldiers. Now the interesting part is, why would the nobles or why would these lords help the king? No one does anything for free. There has to be a give and take. So if the king is getting soldiers, in return what the king would do is, king would give them certain pieces of land. The king would give them some pieces of land. Now this piece of land that was given by the king to lords and nobles was called a fief. F-I-F-E. Fief was a piece of land passed on from the king to the nobles, to the knights, that okay, you take care of the land, you earn money from it, you give it on rent, you force people to work on it, I don't care. Just make sure whenever I need my soldiers, you're ready to supply the soldiers to them. So this was the second level. Now, these nobles and knights, they required many soldiers to be on their payroll, because if they had to supply soldiers to the king, they had to have constant supply of soldiers with themselves. So they deployed many soldiers. How were the soldiers paid? Soldiers were paid mainly in the form of food, in the form of other types of gifts, shelter, etc. These soldiers who used to work for these knights, who used to work for these lords, obey their orders, go to the king to protect the king, go to the king to fight the king. They were in return given protection, they were in return given a piece of land or given some money, given shelter, food, etc. They were told that don't worry, you will be given everything that you require to lead a good life. In return, you come and fight for us. At the lowest level were the peasants. See, in the top three level, no one is working on the land. Everyone is just passing on their piece of land to the other person. The king passed on his piece of land to the lords and the knights. They passed on the piece of land to the soldiers. But even the soldiers are not working on the land. In order to make the land productive, at the end of the day, you need someone to work on the land. Who were these people? They were the ones who came at the lowest level. They were the peasants or the serfs. Serfs, peasants, farmers. They were the ones who were the most exploited, because the productivity of the land depended upon them. They did not have any option to leave their job. If any one of them said, I want to leave my job, I want to go away, no. It was just not allowed. They were kind of fixated with the land that they were working on. They were not even the owners of the land. They did not have any control over the production, what would happen with whatever produce they have. No. They were given a very meager salary or food or produce, and they were expected not to raise their voice. This was medieval Europe. Now, if you actually see, why is this in the form of a pyramid? The reason why this structure is in the form of a pyramid is the people at the lowest level have the highest population. So people at the lowest level, the peasants, the serfs, they might not have a lot of power, but what they do have is population. So if many of them come together, start demanding that no, we also want freedom, we also want changes in our life, it would happen. And this is where liberalism started. So liberalism basically came so that favorable conditions could be created for people working at the lower level, so that they could be given the freedom. And if you want to work on the land by your own choice, go ahead, no one is stopping you. But if you don't want to work on this land by your own choice, you are being forced to do that, then you should be allowed to go. This is how liberalism emerged. So liberalism is not a very old ideology. Middle of the 17th century is when it all emerged, and it was again a reaction to the feudal structure of the European society. Now there are some basic characteristics of liberal ideology and what liberalism believes in. First, the biggest tenet and the biggest characteristic of liberalism is man is a rational creature. What do you mean by this? As I said in the beginning, the idea was a debate whether a human being can take his or her own decisions, or whether a common human being is not intelligent enough to know what the next step should be. Does a person need to be told everything by the government, by the king, or no, a person is rational enough? Liberal thinkers believe every individual is a rational creature. If you set the person free, he will be able to decide what is good for him and what is good for the society. One other interesting contradiction here is, if you let everyone free, as liberal thinkers want, let's say you give every individual liberty to decide whatever they want. If you let them free, what is the guarantee that it will lead to the good of the society? Let's take a very simple example. You drive a car. There is a reason why there is a traffic signal. There is a reason why there is a red light and you're supposed to stop. Now let's assume there is no red light and people are given the liberty to drive in whatever way that they want. Let's assume there is no restriction on driving even after you are drunk. Why? Because liberty. So if people are driving drunk, people are driving at a very high speed, they are not even stopping at any signal. In the name of liberty, is it good for the society? Obviously not. Because such a behavior puts the life of other people at risk. So many people always believe that giving liberty sounds like a good idea, but the problem is an individual's liberty might harm the society as a whole, because an individual may not be able to control his or her actions and would only think about what is good for him rather than telling what is good for the society. Liberal thinkers don't believe that. Liberal thinkers believe there is no contradiction between individual self-interest and the common interest. Why? A liberal thinker believes that even if there is no traffic light, even if there is no red light, a person will still stop, not because he is intelligent or not because he is a very genuine man. A person will stop because he knows that if there is an accident, he himself will also hurt. That is why you have to believe in the rationality of the man. Any man would take decisions not just for his or own self-interest, because a person believes and understands that his self-interest is tied to the interest of the society. If the society itself is not doing well, the person himself will be in danger. So liberals don't believe there is a contradiction between individual aspirations and what the society needs. Third, man has natural rights which cannot be transgressed by any society or any authority. When you read about the topic of rights, as is in our syllabus, you will see there are different types of rights. There are natural rights, there are legal rights, there are historical rights, so on and so forth. There are again moral rights, etc. The first one usually is called the natural rights. Natural rights means just because you are born as a human being in the nature itself is giving you certain rights. And no king, no government, no president, no prime minister can say that I will take away your rights. That is just not allowed. Why? Because these are natural rights given to you by the nature. Liberal thinkers believe that you cannot take away what the government has not given to someone. Rights were given by the nature and only nature can take it away. Next, civil society states are artificial just to ensure that their common interests are served. As you read about the theory of state, there are different ideas given of how did the government first originate? How did the government start? Many thinkers have different points of views. Hobbes has a different point of view. Locke has a different point of view. Machiavelli has a different point of view. Plato has a different point of view. So on and so forth. But the idea is, as per liberal thinkers, God did not create the government. So let's not assume that king or government is of godly nature. Because many thinkers at that time propagated this idea that if you speak against the king, you are speaking against the God. Liberal thinkers don't believe in that. Liberal thinkers believe the government, whatever authority that you have is all artificial. People created it. People created it for their own benefit. So now the same government, the same authority cannot restrict the freedom of the people. That is just not allowed. Next, liberalism promotes civil liberties, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of movement, because for an individual to fulfill his or her aspirations, it is important that all these freedoms are given, all these freedoms are protected by the authority. The next point is actually a continuation of the last one only. The liberal thinkers believe that because state and authority are artificial, because people from the society themselves created it, that is why the freedom of contract has to be upheld. Any contract can only be upheld if an individual believes in it, if an individual gives his or her own consent. No individual can accept any obligation without his or her own consent. You cannot force a person in the society to behave a certain way because others have decided this for him. No. Without his or her own consent, you cannot force a person to take up a certain decision. Liberalism also holds that the public policy should be part of free bargaining between individuals to pursue their common interest. Again, the idea is people living in the society should be given the chance to decide what is good for them and their future, rather than being imposed on them the will of some other few individuals. They should be allowed to bargain with those in power. They should be allowed to come up with a common conclusion so that every party is happy with the eventual outcome. Now, in liberal theory, so far we have discussed about how the idea is that a person, an individual, should be allowed to take his or her own decisions. Does it mean that the government has no role to play? No. Liberal thinkers do not say that the government has zero role to play. Please understand this. Liberal thinkers say the role of the state has to be minimal. They don't talk about absence of government, because absence of government, that is communism. Marxism, communism, they believe in absence of government, they believe in overthrow of the government. Liberal thinkers are not someone who follow the idea of removal of government. Liberal thinkers believe that there is a role for the state, but only in three aspects. First, to protect someone's life and property. If my life is in danger, if someone is trying to encroach over my property, then the state must come up and the state must protect that. Second, to enforce the contracts. Let's assume we are doing business with each other. I signed a contract that give me this much money, in return I will give you this commodity. I took the money but did not give you the commodity. Let's say you ordered an iPhone on Flipkart. There is a contract that if you pay this much money, Flipkart is supposed to supply the iPhone to you. But rather than supplying the iPhone, they gave you a washing bar. Then you are in a situation where you can enforce that contract and take them to the court. This is where the state will come up. So state's second objective as per liberal thinkers is to enforce the contracts. Third, to maintain minimum common service which cannot be undertaken by private entrepreneurs. Common minimum service would mean that some common goods which are needed by everyone in the society. Let's assume water supply, let's say electricity. These kind of goods which are common minimum services, let's say judiciary, they should be maintained by the state because most probably private entrepreneurs will not come into the picture. Again, understand, liberal thinkers don't want a big role of the state in the society. But they are not talking about state being removed. They don't want the state to go away. They understand that state is necessary. They understand that state is a necessary evil. Some of the most famous thinkers associated with the idea of liberalism, and we'll talk about them in detail. John Locke, he is part of a syllabus in the Western political thinkers topic. Adam Smith, you would have read about him in economics. Jeremy Bentham, again someone that is discussed multiple times in the PSIR optional syllabus. All of them have different views. However, all of them confined to the idea of liberalism, confined to the idea that the state has a minimal role to play and individuals' ideas, individuals' freedom should take priority over everything else. Out of these, John Locke is regarded as the father of liberalism. Do remember that. Adam Smith, as I said, you would have read about him in economics. He is called the father of economics. Bentham is called the father of utilitarianism. We will be discussing what utilitarianism is. All these again are different people having kind of similar thoughts on liberalism, just applying them in different ways. And we will be discussing them in detail as we go on. Now, liberalism is not just an ideology that you see in political science. It's also an ideology that you see in economics as well. For example, when you try and deploy liberalism in politics, you essentially mean to say that the society must have democracy. Because what is liberalism? Liberalism means giving liberty to the people. So when you are giving them liberty, essentially what you are trying to tell them is you are free to choose your own representative. You are free to choose who will rule over your country, who will rule over your city. That is the other way to define democracy. So liberalism in political terms is nothing but democracy. Similarly, on economic front, when it talks about economic ideology, in economic terms, in a market, when you give freedom to people to explore their own entrepreneurial ideas, when you give freedom to people to have whatever business they want, to have whatever job they want, what you essentially mean to say is you are giving push to capitalism. Again, please don't be confused. Capitalism, democracy, liberalism are different words. What we mean to say here is liberalism means giving freedom to people. When you deploy this idea in politics, giving freedom to people in politics, that means democracy, allowing people to choose whoever they want in power. In economic terms, liberalism means giving freedom to people to run their own business, giving freedom to people to run in whatever way that they want, deploy as many people as they want, decide the salary of the people, have their business without government interference. That is what translates into capitalism. Now, these two might have very different meanings, which is true, but both of them are somewhere connected and linked to giving enough liberty. Now, one interesting idea is, many thinkers say that liberalism and capitalism do not seem to be related to each other or do not seem to have the common goal. Let's try and understand. Liberalism means giving freedom to the common man, letting the common man decide whatever they want. But capitalism, on the other hand, may lead to exploitation of the people themselves. What is capitalism? Capitalism means where few people or anyone can run their own business, leading to a few people usually acquiring most of the economic power, few people accumulating all the wealth, making sure that they call the shots, making sure that they are the ones who influence the policies more. This capitalist system, in fact, can lead to exploitation of the people in large numbers, and this has happened. Historically speaking, we have had seen many times in history where capitalist system leads to exploitation of people. Look at the Industrial Revolution. When Industrial Revolution began in Britain, people were given a very, very meager salary. There was no restriction on the number of working hours. People were forced to work for 16, 17 hours a day with almost zero salary. On one hand, you call it liberty, liberty being given to the capitalist to pay whatever wages that he or she wants. But on the other hand, this is also exploitation. So the interesting part is, although capitalism starts when you give liberty to the people, but then the same capitalism also leads to exploitation of a large number of people, also leads to liberty being taken away. So I hope you are trying to understand the contradiction between liberalism and capitalism. Capitalism thrives when there is liberalism, but capitalism can lead to snatching away liberties of a lot of people. That is where the idea of a welfare state comes into the picture. We'll talk about welfare state in a bit. Welfare state in simple terms is a government, is an idea where the government must take care of the basic necessities of the people. For example, if I am paying taxes to the government, what I expect in return is if I fall ill and if I can't afford my own treatment, the government will have adequate healthcare facilities to support me. If I'm not able to find a job, if there is some economic crisis in the society, I expect the government to come and help me out. Let's see what happened in the COVID-19 crisis. When the COVID-19 crisis was ongoing, different countries used different methods to help their own citizens. Countries such as the US, they distributed free money, they gave checks to all their citizens, free money was being given by the government. In India, although free money was not distributed by the government, gave a lot of food grains, gave a lot of food related items to a lot of people. Money was transferred to the farmers, money was transferred to the other section of the society. All these are examples of income support which comes in the form of, or which comes in welfare governments or welfare state. There may also be examples of education, etc. that comes in the picture. Now, all of these are examples of welfare state. The welfare state emerged because it was being seen that capitalism is taking away liberty of the people. Capitalism is taking away the most basic necessities, the most basic requirements of the people. This is why there was always a requirement to have the government playing a slightly bigger role to ensure liberty of the people on one hand, but at least the basic minimum requirements of individuals are met, even though they might not have a lot of money in their own hands. This is where the welfare state came into the picture. Now, even amongst the thinkers that follow liberal theory or that are the proponents of liberalism, there are two different schools of thought. First, individualism. In simple terms, we're giving priority to individual. And the second school of thought is utilitarianism. Let's try and understand this. Individualism. As the name suggests, individualism means a theory that means an individual's judgment, individual's dignity, and individual's freedom should be given topmost priority no matter what. Let's take a simple example. Now, the government of India, let's assume, says that we will be giving free of cost water to the farmers or free of cost electricity to the people. Now, when you give free of cost water, when you say we will not take water bill, many people criticize that. They say that no, it will lead to misuse of water, it will lead to increasing water bills, etc. It will harm the environment. But it is an individual whose happiness is being kept at the center. This is the individual school of thought. Means for the larger interest of the society, just because it will make the entire society happy, no individual should be made to suffer. Let's assume I drive a car which pollutes the environment. Now, you might say, oh, I should not do this. Environment is of everyone. It harms everyone. I should not take my car. I should walk 10 kilometers. But as an individual, I will not like it. So, individualism is a thought that means an individual should not be asked to compromise his or her way of life just because it will be in the interest of the larger society. That is what you meant by individualism. Rights of the individuals have to be given much more preference rather than rights of a company, rights of a society, rights of a larger group. No, it is the individual whose rights have to be given preference over anyone else. This school of thought, that is individualism, was propagated by thinkers such as John Locke and Adam Smith. According to them, if you keep an individual happy in the society, the entire society will take care of itself. Just because the larger society wants something else, an individual should not be asked to compromise on what his or her way of life is. The other school of thought here is called utilitarianism. That's simple. Utilitarianism means greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. Simple example. When the government takes a certain decision, how is it decided if the decision is right or wrong? The simple idea is, if the decision gives maximum happiness to maximum number of people, it's a good decision. Let's take a simple example. Let's say there is a very famous personality, actor, actress, or sports star, whatever you want to call, politician, very famous personality, on whom a case is filed. The charge is that the person has murdered someone. Now, most of the people believe that no, he is not guilty. Most of the people love him, they say no, he can't do anything wrong, he is not guilty, etc. If you follow the principle of utilitarianism, that means the person should be set free. Why? Because setting him free would lead to maximum happiness of the maximum number of people. Because if you punish the person, it might only give happiness to those whose relative was murdered. It will only give happiness to those who were related to the victim. But utilitarianism means that you should think about happiness of the greatest number of people rather than of just a few people. The most famous proponent of utilitarianism is Jeremy Bentham. According to him, human behavior or human beings are very, very simple beings. Humans have just one agenda, that is to avoid pain and to get pleasure as much as possible. Now the problem here is, while giving his idea of utilitarianism, Bentham did not differentiate between qualities of different pleasures. Let's take a simple example. Let's say that a scientist is making a scientific discovery. Okay. Now, in order for the scientist to observe, let's say, the solar system or the atmosphere, the scientist wants that all the lights in the area should be switched off so that there is no reflection, and I want to make sure that I can discover something which is extremely helpful in the long term for the humanity. It will bring a lot of good. But in that area, there are many people who are partying, who don't want the lights to be switched off. If you follow the principle of utilitarianism, you would argue that no, the light should not be switched off because more people want the lights to be switched on. Their pleasure of partying cannot be compared to the pleasure of a scientist making a discovery of a lifetime. That is a problem with the principle of utilitarianism. Just because 100 people want some small happiness, that does not really mean that a big discovery or a big invention should be stopped just because they don't immediately see the goal of it. This is a big problem here with the principle of utilitarianism that Jeremy Bentham had given. In fact, with respect to utilitarianism, it's very, very important for you to remember a very important quote which highlights how there is a difference between the different types of pleasures that human beings have. The quote goes something like this: "It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. It is better to be a Socrates dissatisfied than a human being or a fool satisfied." In other words, not everyone is at the same level. Socrates is above other human beings in terms of intelligence. So the thing that gives pleasure or happiness to Socrates is not the same that gives happiness to common human beings. Similarly, if something gives happiness to a pig, that cannot be compared to something that gives pleasure to a human being. That is why utilitarianism principle cannot be applied just blindly by saying that whatever gives you the maximum happiness should be followed, because that may not be the right decision in the long term. This is a very, very important quote. In fact, a quote that has been asked by the UPSC multiple times in the PSIR paper. John Stuart Mill, that is J.S. Mill, was the one who actually found out these faults in Bentham's theory, highlighting the fact that pleasures are of different kinds. You cannot compare pleasure of a common human being with that of Socrates. You cannot compare pleasure of a pig with that of human beings. And this is where utilitarianism has certain holes that need to be filled in. Now, liberalism and the theory of liberalism cannot be complete without studying neoliberalism as well. Most of the theories that you will study, you will see that there is a neo form of them as well. Neo in simple terms means new version. Neo-capitalism, neo-socialism, neo-Marxism, similarly neoliberalism. The idea is simple. Liberalism, when it first began, the idea was give freedom to everyone, government should have a minimal role to play, government should not interfere in the lives of the people, government should not even interfere in the businesses, so on and so forth. However, when this freedom became too much, when it became evident that it is actually harming individuals rather than helping them, we saw capitalists exploiting people, We saw the capitalist class giving a very, very meager wage to people. We saw the capitalist class taking advantage of the liberty. This is where the idea of the welfare state came into picture. The idea of welfare state, as I discussed earlier, where the government has a responsibility to look after the welfare of the people. This also was because we had a situation which we call as the Great Depression. In between the two world wars, there was this Great Depression in the US. There was a huge crash of the stock market, and it was not just confined to the US. Almost every European country saw the after effects of it. There was an economic decline. That was a time period where it was thought that maybe giving so much freedom to individuals to run the businesses and asking the government to take a back seat may not be the right step forward. This is where the idea of welfare state became more prominent. That the government should keep some things in their control. The government should not allow complete freedom. The government should ensure that at least there are a few things which are kept under control of the government. However, when we reached the decade of 1970s, 80s, this is where countries such as US and UK thought that the idea of welfare state is becoming too much. Earlier, the idea of liberty, capitalism was becoming too much. People were being exploited. Now the idea of welfare state was becoming too much because the government was increasing its role, the government was increasing its interference day by day. And this is when the demand started of introducing neoliberalism. Neoliberalism propagated the idea of laissez-faire. Laissez-faire, in simple terms, it's a French phrase which means let do. Again, allow free market economy. Basically, going back to the original ideas of liberalism. Having certain things in government control are fine. Make sure that there are certain roadblocks that the government has in place, very minimal. But again, going back to the idea of free market economy, again giving a push to capitalism. That is the idea of neoliberalism. So again, we started with liberalism. Going on well led to exploitation of people. That propagated the idea of a welfare state. But when welfare state became too much, this is when we again went back to the idea of neoliberalism. This is step by step from how we started with liberalism to how we came to neoliberalism. Neoliberalism has a very famous phrase related to it. That phrase is rolling back the frontiers of the state. Rolling back the idea of the state. Rolling back the role of the state. Making sure that the government does not become too heavy. It was in the second half of the 20th century where countries such as US and UK mainly started this idea. There were two main leaders in these countries who were given the credit of taking their countries back to liberalism and capitalism. In case of UK, it was their Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. In case of US, it was their President Ronald Reagan. Do remember these two. Again, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan in UK and US respectively. They are said to be the two individuals which actually said that role of the government is increasing day by day. It's getting too much. We would like to roll it back. We would like to roll back the frontiers of the state. And we would like to bring back neoliberalism. This is Margaret Thatcher. And this is Ronald Reagan. She very famously gave this quote: "We have not rolled back the frontiers of the state in Britain to see them reimposed in European level and European superstate exercising a new dominance from Brussels." Brussels basically headquarters of EU. So what she is demanding here is that in UK, they have rolled back the role of the state. They don't want Europe now to impose the government and the government control over them. These two again are considered as the biggest proponents who were in active politics, the biggest proponents of neoliberalism, again Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. Specific examples of neoliberalism can be found in these countries. For example, in US, in 1978, Jimmy Carter, who was the American president, he made a law that the American airlines and the American air industry can set whatever rates they want for flying tickets. Before that, the American government had put a ceiling that this is the maximum airfare you can charge from the passengers. This was a classic example of the government interfering in the private sector. Classic example of the government telling how to do the business. Over here, the US government led by Jimmy Carter said that no, we will deregulate it. We will not have the government control our fares. We will not have the government control how the market works. Companies are free to set their own fares. Again, neoliberalism is very similar to the idea of liberalism itself. However, learning from its mistakes. One of the reasons why neoliberalism emerged was because the government was having a much active role to play, much more active than what it was envisioned earlier. Experts learned from the idea of liberalism. They learned from the fact that we cannot give a free hand to the capitalists to do whatever they want. That is why in today's time, if you look at countries such as US or UK, yes, they have given freedom to their industrialists, to their entrepreneurs, but they still have certain safety nets. For example, minimum wages. Both these countries have law about minimum wages. The government does not tell what is the maximum that you can give. You are free to decide that. But there is a minimum wage that you must give to your employee. The government, in these cases, tries to give a push to genuine democracy. The problem here is, with governments now deciding things such as minimum wages, etc., in democracies, political parties are using this to gain more and more votes. See what is happening in India. When political parties go and ask for votes, the single biggest promises that they make are freebies. I'll give you this for free, I'll give you that for free, vote for me, I will not take electricity bill, I'll not take water bill, so on and so forth. So the entire idea of neoliberalism and the government giving a bit of safety net has also led to a politics where the governments are now asking for votes against the welfare schemes. This is also a big problem. The reality is, right now, no country in the world can say, I am a capitalist country purely or I am a socialist country purely. Almost all countries around the world right now are mixed economies. There is no country in the world that can survive without a basic safety net given to its own citizens. It can be in the form of minimum wages, it can be in the form of farm subsidies. Countries such as the US blame India for farm subsidies, but the reality is the farmer subsidy given in the US is many times higher than what we have in India. So yes, we are going back to liberalism, but in reality on ground, governments still give certain safety nets to the people of their own country. There are a few criticisms of neoliberalism. First, misguided free market approach to public services means neoliberalist or liberalist thinkers forget the fact that there are certain basic needs of everyone in the society that need to be properly distributed. You cannot differentiate between, for example, water, electricity. These are some of the most basic things, and you cannot say that no, government will not do anything. The government has to provide these basic public services to everyone. Neoliberalism also leads to monopolies. It leads to some companies becoming so big, so huge, that they are the ones who control the entire sector, and then they artificially increase the prices. In fact, in the US in the past few years, if you have seen, there are a lot of concerns about companies such as Apple, Microsoft, Google, Facebook becoming too big. In fact, the US lawmakers are nudging these companies to break up into smaller parts because they are becoming too huge. Like right now, if you have to give an online ad, Google has almost a monopoly over it. They decide at what rate the ads will be given, at what website the ads will be given, so on and so forth. It also can lead to financial instability, with a few people having their hands on most of the resources, while the other people not having enough to sustain themselves. And this financial instability is a hallmark of neoliberalism. Then it leads to inequality and globalization. Now, globalization may not be a proper criticism as such, but if you look at globalization as a topic in itself, you will see that globalization has led to certain problems. Problems such as decline in the local market, especially the small businesses have increased competition now. In India, the small stuff that you used to buy from a shop nearby your house, now you order the same on Amazon. You don't even want to go out of your house. So it is leading to decline of those small businesses because the government has given all the liberty. If the government would have put certain restrictions that this is how much you can earn, or if you want to order online, only this can be ordered online, this cannot be ordered online, then obviously it would have been a much more even distributed field, which is not really the case now in case of neoliberalism. In the end, there are some very interesting characteristics of liberalism that you must all remember. First, liberalism helps the bourgeois section the most. For those who don't know, if you look at the society, you can divide that into different sections, mainly bourgeois, that is a capitalist class, and the proletariat. Proletariat are the working class, and the bourgeois are the capitalist class, and the minority, they are the ones who have most of the resources in their hand. If you remember, the reason behind introduction of liberalism was to help the common people at the lowest level of the pyramid, help the individuals get control over their life, give them more liberty, allow them to decide whether or not they want to work for this landlord, allow them the freedom to choose their own profession, allow them the freedom to choose their own occupation, so on and so forth. However, over time, it has developed into a system where again a few individuals have most of the power in their hand without the interference of the government. We have again a situation where a few people have most of the powers in their hand, and they have not allowed the state to come up and create a welfare net or a safety net. Liberalism, again, as we discussed, favors a capitalist system. It kind of gives an illusion that no, the common people, the common man will also get the freedom to decide whatever he or she wants, and that is true. But the reality is, when monopolies develop, when you have only a few companies where you can go and work, when the demand is lower and the supply of the workers is higher, the workers will always be at the back foot. If there are 10 job openings and 100 people are applying for it, the company can afford to pay a very low wage because they know even at a lower wage, the people will come and will have to work. In the absence of a safety net, in the absence of a minimum wage parameter by the government, that becomes a problem. So liberalism again helps the bourgeois more than the proletariat. Second, there are certain groups in the society that become more powerful than the others. The capitalist group, they are the ones who influence the government much more and make the policies. It is a reality that governments around the world, when they are making their policies, they make sure that they take feedback from few selected individuals. Individuals whose interests are matching with the interests of the state. Individuals whose policies impact, or whose businesses rather, impact the entire country. In our case, it would be the big businessmen, the big entrepreneurs, etc. It's foolish to assume that the government will take into consideration all the common people and their views before making a policy. In a liberal system, again, there are few individuals that become very, very, very powerful. There are few vested interests, business interests that make their voices heard. You can call them as pressure groups if you want. You can call them as lobbies in the Western world. But these are those groups that make their voices heard. There is an imbalance between the common individual and his or her interest and the interest of these groups. Now, the fact is, liberalism has contributed a lot in our society. Before liberalism, Europe mainly was going through a period of feudalism, where very few people controlled everything in the society, where the peasant, the farmers, the workers were tied to their land. There was no middle class as such. There was the king, the nobles, the knights, and in the very end, there were the peasants. The middle class, as you call today, it did not exist. Because you were either very poor working in the factory, or you were very rich owners of the factory. There was no one in between as such. Liberalism gave rise to the new middle class. People became merchants. Some people from the working group gathered the courage to have their own new venture. They gathered the courage to venture out and become industrialists themselves. Yes, the condition of the working class for most of them deteriorated. They were still exploited. But on the other hand, we saw that a few of them rose up to jump from one sphere to the other. Liberalism also gave rise to another ideology that we might discuss later, socialism. When people got fed up of liberalism, of capitalism, of industrialists exploiting the people, of few people controlling everything, of all the resources in the society being concentrated in a few people's hand, when this situation came up, this is when socialism again started to rise. Socialism as an ideology is opposite to liberalism. Socialism talks about equal distribution of resources in the society. It talks about the government's control over important resources. It talks about how the government should make sure that the benefits of anything in the society are distributed equally rather than being concentrated in the hands of a few people. It's also a part of our dietary principles. If you look at dietary principle in Article 39B, 39C, both of these talk about distribution of the community resources in a manner that it leads to benefits of the large number of people, which is essentially what is socialism. So reaction to liberalism was socialism. One more theory attached to liberalism that came up was constitutionalism. Now, constitutionalism is not a political ideology as such. Constitutionalism is a way that modern democracies and modern societies work. In the era of feudalism, the king controlled everything. The king was the lawmaker, the executive, and the judge. The king was above the law if there was any law present. With liberalism coming in, with man being considered as a rational being, theory of constitutionalism came up, which means that a state, a government must work as per the constitution. No one sitting at any position, no organ of the government can be allowed to have arbitrary power. For example, look at UK, look at Japan. These are still monarchies. They still have emperor, they still have the king, the monarch. But these are constitutional monarchies. Means the power of the emperor, the power of the king is not unlimited. It is limited by what is written in the constitution. This essentially is constitutionalism. Constitutionalism led to separation of powers in different organs of the government. This is also something that came up as an offshoot of liberalism only. Because before liberalism, it was not believed that a common man can take decisions on their own. It was the king who would take decisions for everyone. Then with liberalism, when it was established that no, a common man can choose their governments and their government should have the power, the government should make the constitution and the country must work as per the constitution. That is when constitutionalism came into the picture. And that is how the theory of constitutionalism exists even today. I hope if you have read and listened to the entire lecture, you should be able to answer almost all the questions related to liberalism that has been asked in the past few years. As you can see, almost every alternate year, you do see a related question, either on liberalism or on neoliberalism somehow. Make sure that you write at least one or two answers. Also, the best part is, if you want me to evaluate your answers, to give you feedback, I'll be happy to do that. There is an email ID I've given here. I'm also writing the same in the description of the video. You can send me your answers of PSIR. I'll be happy to do that. Also, if you're new here, make sure that you subscribe to this YouTube channel. I'll be trying to put out more videos like this. Do tell me in the comment section if you liked it or not. Invite your other friends also here who are preparing for the UPSC examination. Either they have the PSIR as an optional subject, or even if they don't have it, I will be uploading other videos as well here for your own benefit. Make sure that you subscribe and hit the like button. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one very soon. Have a good day. Bye-bye.